Well, thank you everyone for coming from near and far.
Put the phone, put it close to your mouth as possible.
Nicholas, really? Nick Camper, are you listening?
Yes.
I'm delighted that you ring him during dinner. Takes the pressure off me having to listen to GDPs and various other things. So keep doing it. Thanks for everyone for coming. As Anna would say, we really appreciate it, especially the people who've come from a long way away. Anna, you've done the best speech. I can't even match you. But I wouldn't even try because I think Nick gets my wisdoms every day, so he doesn't need to hear anything from me. But why I've stood up is because Tony Harris, who is a very good friend of Nicholas's, wrote a piece that he offered for the evening. And David, to be honest, I thought that I needed to read it because I didn't think that it's an interesting piece, which, unless you've read it a few times, you might have got it wrong. And it needs to be read correctly. So, no pressure. So Tony Harris, for those of you who don't know, was a journalist with the Financial Review, but he also worked with Nicholas and John Dawkins' office when he was Treasurer. And he was also an Auditor General of New South Wales, so his way of writing is interesting. About Nicholas Gruen. Nicholas and I have crossed paths, sorry, I have to put my glasses on now, getting old, have crossed paths for much of the past 35 years. We've also walked on the same route at the same time, and this is what I've learned of him. There is no doubt that when Nicholas arrived 60 years ago, he was properly primed. He was among the best prepared Australian infant of his generation. Of course, this had nothing to do with Nicholas. It was all the work of his parents, a great gift to any son. But we can say that Nicholas took advantage of this start. He added a few degrees, even a professorial position or two. And importantly, he adopted a social view of the world that is too rare amongst all of those described as economists. Nicholas is one of the rare persons who understands that we do not wish to live in an economy, but a society. And he understands that economists should be directed to that end, even if it means that measured GDP suffers at the expense of better unmeasured living standards. Some of us are catching up with this, helped a little by the episodic article in the Fairfax Press, alas, not the Financial Review, on measuring our living standards using factors not captured by the GDP. Nick has a couple of other qualities that have shaped his life: an untiring curiosity and a broad and deep knowledge about our economy. And there is a fourth characteristic that has helped shape Nicholas's professional life. He is not fearful of studying new and ambitious ideas, whatever their origin, and of advocating those ideas he thinks are worthwhile, notwithstanding their novelty. We've seen this all of his working life, even as recently as last week when he wrote in the Saturday paper of a new role for the Reserve Bank. As one Treasury officer told me, the new role proposed by Nick for the Reserve is eminently sensible and practical. Of course, Nicholas married well. Yes, he did, Tony. Even if he had to enjoin his tailor and Eva's florist as the wedding witnesses in Florence. And he and Eva produced and shaped and unleashed a fine pair of Gruens. But there are some shadows as well. Yes, there are. Nicholas is cynical about politics. He allows pragmatism far too large a role in the pursuit of office. But a person of his youth, after all, 60 is nothing when we have a 70-year-old Defence Secretary, can still develop and learn. I'm sorry that my walking stick has prevented me from joining today's celebrations for Nicholas' past birth, but I hope we can remedy that in Canberra soon. Tony Harris.
So while people are collecting their thoughts, I'm just going to tell one other story, which is just an example of one of the things that, one of Nick's strengths, which is his playfulness with the language. And this story occurs when I was studying in Cambridge, and it was in the days when people used to still write letters to each other. And my father had written he was quite diligent in writing letters, and he wrote a letter, an aerogram. I don't know whether aerograms still exist, but he wrote an aerogram, and at the end of the aerogram, having left some space at the bottom, he wrote, "I'll see if I can convince Nick to add a few words." And Nick wrote underneath, "Dad's powers of persuasion are not what they used to be." That's all he wrote. So, yeah, he was, but I was quite interested in some news. Does anybody else wish to speak? You've only got a short time because Nick has a speech. Nick has a speech, so we're going to pass over to Nick unless I get a better offer.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you. I've got a bit of a speech here, so apologies for that. Thank you. I should keep it. See how it works when you hold it quite close to your mouth. Everyone can hear. So Eva's been saying to me this is a great event because it's really going to be like being at your own funeral when people make nice speeches about you. And I guess that's right. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. And I'm very apologetic that I haven't been able to spend as much time as I would like with everyone. But I haven't been able to for obvious reasons. Now, those speeches, Anna has heard this story before. I told this story at her 21st. But those speeches do remind me of an event in the car when Anna was about 5. And I decided to practice some positive parenting, shall we say. And I sat in the car and I said to Eva in the front, I think Eva was driving, and I said, "Eva, Mama, don't you just love Anna? Don't you love all the things about Anna? I like the way she cooperates. I like the way she's so enthusiastic. I love the way she helps Alexander. I love how much she loves Yaya and Papu and their stories. And what do you love, Mama?" And Mama said, "I love that Anna's such a happy girl. And she's always making friends, and she always tries to help people. And I like the pictures that she draws." Anyway, we went on for quite a while, and then we stopped. And there was silence for about 30 seconds, and then from the back of the car we heard, "Go on." So, I was a bit disappointed when there were no further people coming forward. Let me just give you this won't go on for too long, but anyway, some of the best things about my life. Obviously, as Tony Harris has said, I had great parents. They were very different. They had great background. They had very different backgrounds, and the whole was much greater than the sum of the parts. I think I got that right. Different backgrounds, different temperament. They were optimistic. This was an optimistic time. It's only really occurred to me in the last 10 years that I was brought up by a migrant, that there was salami in the house, that cheese extended to extraordinary and exotic things like camembert, because when I was born, cheese was cheddar. You didn't call it cheddar, you called it cheese. Actually, that's not true. There's cheddar, or there is cheese, and then there's Kraft processed cheese. Those were the two kinds of cheese. So Dad would bring this stuff back, but because he spoke good English, I didn't have to, be embarrassed, although I did go to primary school with Jennifer Byrne, and we took Jennifer home one night to her house, and Dad had an accent, which is something that was completely unknown to me. And as she got out of the car, she said, "I've got it, you're Chinese." Anyway, her powers of investigation have improved since then. I had a great brother too. Still, if you didn't know, if you knew David from when I did, you probably have thought with me that there was room for improvement. The very first time he got better was when he stopped beating me up regularly. That happened at first gradually, somewhere between the ages of 10 and 20. No doubt, as he observed, I spent a good period of time winding him up so I could go and dob him to mum and dad. But I'm serious when I say that I've got a great brother. All of you here will know many of you here will know his intelligence, the diligence and care with which he does things, his decency, his integrity, and the infectious manic energy of his sense of humour. And he hasn't beaten me up for around 50 years. And he's probably never beaten any of you up. He's a really pretty nice guy. There are two kinds of regrets. You know that saying that you don't want to die wondering? Well, we bandy it about. Perhaps this is an example of some of the things that Nick Campbell was talking about. Of course, we always die wondering. There are plenty of things we die wondering. I can think of two things I'll die wondering about. One is whether I should have become a politician. But though I'll die wondering, I'm pretty sure I'll die thinking that that would have been a mistake. I listed a small sample of my character traits that would probably feature as weaknesses in a candidate in a recent speech at the Adelaide Festival of Ideas late last year. These traits include my thin skin, excitable and anxious temperament, difficulty sleeping, especially if I've got some deadline or someone's looked sideways at me, incompetence at small talk, and the difficulty I experience feigning enjoyment in the company of someone I find odious. Tendency to over-intellectualise. Anyone who's interested, I send out to a mailing list sort of essays and things that I've published, and I got one back from my good friend at Haileybury College, Colin Nash, who's with me tonight, and he said, geez, you're still so verbose, Gruen. And anyway, when I was at school, I would have just taken that as evidence that, Colin really just didn't appreciate my greatness, but I think he was probably right. It was something to think about. Tendency to over-intellectualise, tendency to enthusiasm, never a good idea in politics, inability to switch off, odd looks, fanatical aversion to cliches, euphemisms and newly coined pieties. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the latte people. A sense of humour, and what is worse, one better tuned to the ridiculous than the sublime, and in the Australian fashion, more successfully deployed in the deprecation of self than others. Desire to see both sides of an argument bordering on the pathological. Sometimes I see even more than two sides in an argument. My capacious regard for my own ignorance, and similarly capacious regard for the ignorance of others. My dislike of pomposity and self-importance, with occasional lapses regarding my own, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really only getting started. Anyway, I'm not in the cloister. I get to play in a very minor way in the only thing that really interests me about politics, which is the ideas we have, the values they embody, and how we think about them. One doubt I do have is something that was adverted to by David. And that is that I'm the most dismal of dismal scientists. Not an economist, but a second-generation economist. Both David and I tried quite hard not to be economists, you've heard. I even became a cartoonist for 3 years and produced some good work, and had much more entertaining things to say when people asked me what I did back in those days. I brought some of those cartoons and I showed them to some people, and they don't seem to have. They seem to have been about as successful at this party as they were in the marketplace. But they are quite good, and I recommend them to you and they're down there. David tried physics and then molecular physiology, in which he was showing off pretty obviously. in which he completed his first PhD. But as for not becoming an economist like Dad, well, we both stand before you tonight. Hashtag epic fail. There are a lot of second-generation economists about. I think it might have something to do with the reductive quality of economic thinking, which, if you come within its gravitational pull, somehow robs you of the idea that other ways of thinking really matter as much. A bad habit, I think. Anyway, the thing is, unless you're Picasso or Einstein, you do die wondering about possible alternative pathways. But they're really not regrets. Apart from anything else, if you did those things, you'd be such a different person that it wouldn't be you regretting your action. It would be someone else. And my own approach to this dilemma has been to try and broaden the way economics is done. I'll say a bit about that shortly. But I do have one regret. As some of you will know, after my father left his mother in Vienna in 1936, when he was 15, he never saw her again. Needless to say, I never met her. She was engulfed in the Holocaust. Her name was Marianne. My regret is that right now, no descendant of mine, or more particularly of Dad's, bears the middle name Marianne. But that problem is easily remediable. I have a good chance of having grandchildren, and I'm perfectly prepared to accept that if they're boys, the Safe School program notwithstanding, they won't carry the name Marianne. But girls, well, I'll get a number of bites at the cherry. If my kids and their partners don't come good, there'll be no hard feelings. After all, as I know myself, it's a very personal decision. But then Grandpa will just set to work brainwashing his grandkids in the hope of success in the next generation. Think of it as a special gesture from Harry Potter to Voldemort. My time, when I was born, I jotted down a few things. LSD meant pounds, shillings and pence. When the grand final teams came out at the MCG in 1957, there were a few bits of crepe paper wrapped over the race. Our world is completely changed, in which we are forever grandly performing ourselves. It was an incredibly different world, and so it's kind of exciting to think that I have seen both of those things. My mum was proud, not just of small things, like we didn't spell specialise in the way those Americans did, those vulgar Americans, but also of large things, like the fact that Australian policemen didn't wear guns like those Americans did, that we didn't put our hands on our hearts when they played the national anthem. We were in a golden age of growth and equality, but we never knew then. A golden age of cultural unity, when there may have been working and middle class, when things were worse for women and black people and gay people, but we didn't have words which carried the contempt of the many for the many, like bogans and losers. Who would have guessed that all those things would change? But change they did, and change they continue to do. Anyway, insofar as I've achieved anything of worldly achievement or reputation, it has been by way of trying to figure stuff out. In that regard, the only real education I ever got was in history. It taught me three things. One, that you can read two people who've dedicated their whole professional lives to a subject and not be completely lost in weighing up some debate between them. You can start by sizing up whether they're meeting the strengths of their opponent's argument or just pretending, picking minor points on which to quibble and denigrate their opponent. As the debates between historians showed me, knowledge is constructed by people who started out knowing nothing, just like me. Or, as Steve Jobs put it in a very different context, life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. History taught me that always and everywhere, ideas, Oh, how cute. Thank you. History taught me that always and everywhere, ideas shouldn't be taken on the authority of their authors or the brand of the consulting company or their fees, but on their merits, in situ, there and then. 2, whenever you're doing something, you can do it and reflect on what it is you're doing. If you're studying the past and you're examining documents, you are at the same time meditating on your method of inquiry, on your means of knowledge, and indeed on whether it's worth it and why. And of course, that's a powerful way of making all your efforts an endless meditation, not on your cleverness, but on the strategies you come up with to deal with your capacious ignorance. 3, understanding what people are saying, what they really mean, can be difficult. It often requires a lot of painstaking effort, especially if you disagree with them. And thinking your way into other ways of thinking requires more than cleverness. In fact, cleverness often gets in the way. That's what I took into economics, a discipline more or less ruined by a relentless cult of stupid cleverness. A discipline in which ideas which are absurd on their face, like the idea that the Great Depression was a spontaneous holiday taken by tens of millions of people, are made respectable by cleverness. Of course, I had the advantage of having learned the economic style of thinking over the breakfast table with Dad. But long before I'd formally studied any economics, I discovered to my frustration that I had a much more powerful economic intuition than most trained economists I encountered, collected as they were into cabals in which economics counted more as a badge of identity than as an engine of inquiry. I'm thinking particularly when I started working for John Button, and John's son Jamie is here tonight. The basic ideas of economics are embarrassingly simple. They're crude and powerful for good or ill. In fact, I was once at a function where H.C. Nugget Coombs launched his last book. It was a book which offered quite prescient warning about the environmental limits to growth. I was sitting at the corner of the table in the Fellows Garden at ANU with a somewhat ditzy acolyte of Nuggets on my left and Nugget on my right. And she announced that she didn't understand economics because it was also complicated and mathematical. And I said to her that economics was very simple. It really has only one idea, and you've heard it sung earlier on. Nugget leant across and he said, yes, and it's wrong. In any event, starting with my work with John Button, I fashioned what was a slightly different way of using economic ideas in a way that chimed with my sense of taking ideas on their merits. I started a company on April Fool's Day in the year 2000, which is called Lateral Economics. But it's taken me until the last year or so to think that perhaps this is not just a cute brand name designed to convey the idea that you might get some fresh thinking. Perhaps it's actually a way of using economic ideas, and I'm getting interested in developing it, trying to show it in action. I've even got some visiting academic positions where I may try and inflict it on whoever comes along. I've always admired Socrates for subverting the use of the youth of the city. I've always rather had a hankering for it myself. I've only got a few more pages to go. I hope you're standing up out there. I'm also not shy to take that approach elsewhere. Always, thanks. He's the guy who called me a verbose, I'm sorry. I've always been prepared to take it elsewhere if it seemed to make sense. So in a world of TED Talks where everyone's after change you can believe in, I'm actually on a mission to save democracy. I know it sounds absurd, but I have a clear and simple and I think compelling idea, not that it's original, that there are two ways of representing the people. One is by election, and the other is the much more time-honoured way of the ancient Athens pursued, and we use in juries, selection by lot. As far as my achievements in having my economic ideas heard are concerned, if you were assessing me according to KPIs, I'd be going okay. I was intimately involved in designing the Button car plan, had a lot to do with the R&D tax concession. I also was the presiding commissioner on a productivity commission report that recommended plain paper packaging for cigarettes. Yes, but I don't think I don't think there's any causal relation between the policy and my suggestion, but who knows. On the other hand, if it comes to actually getting my ideas about information, about building a healthier relation between public and private goods, and about honouring the knowledge people have of their own life experience against the dictates of systems really engaged with, including to be challenged, I have to say I've drawn an almost comprehensive blank. There's no trouble being respected in being invited to speak to people, important and otherwise, but then entertained, perhaps refreshed by how innovative it makes them feel just listening to me. They go back to their intros. But if that's the dividend of decades of public policy work, I'm finding my work on democracy less of an echo chamber. I'll demonstrate that to you by reading a letter and a parcel I received 2 weeks ago. Dear Dr. Gruen, having read some of your articles and Gittins' recommendations, I am encouraged to think you might find my new book interesting. My 1985 book, Is Democracy Possible? The Alternative to Electoral Politics, was influential in promoting interest in sortition, or selection at random. The present book is practical, offering a side range of suggestions that require no mass conversion of voters to sortition. I turn 90 in a couple of weeks, and I no longer have the ability to promote it, especially because I'm very deaf and have been out of circulation for almost 30 years. I think the book has a couple of very important things to say that I hope you will find congenial. Best wishes, John Bernheim, Camperdown, New South Wales. Well, that's a pretty good letter to get as far as I'm concerned. In any event, all that pales into insignificance with having two kids who are simply fantastic human beings. You've seen one of them here tonight, and Alex couldn't make it because he's back in the UK doing exams which they call collections. And he's in third term, which they call Trinity term. And to sit the exams, he's dressing up in funny clothes, which they call sub-fuss. In any event, Eva and I were very attentive and put a lot of time into our kids. Eva far more than me, of course, it has to be said. Their great-grandparents were in on the action, and while we were in Canberra, and as a consequence, the first word Anna uttered after Mama, Dada, Yaya and Papu was in Greek. It was the word alogor, which means horse. Horse, she said. The other thing about that's the yummy police. The yummy police come and get you if you're eating something too yummy. That is a fact. And what Anna didn't explain is that the yummy police drive around in cars with sticky date puddings on the roof going round and round and round and round like that. And Anna, I know this is true because Anna actually saw yummy police disappearing around a corner on several occasions. But I digress. When I played a practical joke on myself and got myself moved to Melbourne, I can explain later if you like, we didn't use creches much except for emergencies or even babysitters after one turned up on roller skates with a safety pin through some part of her face. Some people told us that with the level of attention we were spoiling them, that they'd have separation anxiety. But the very first time we did take Anna to childcare, Eva hung around in case of separation anxiety. Anna wandered in, checked things out, then said to her anxious mother, "You can go now, Ma. Off you go." So there you have it. If I'd written out the qualities I wanted in a couple of kids 25 years ago, I might have listed thoughtfulness, intelligence, no, I didn't say cleverness, kindness, resilience, and a continually unfolding individuality and maturity. Trust me, that's what we got. I couldn't be prouder. So if the best thing I ever did was marry Eva and have two kids, the one person I haven't spoken about so far, she's not going to like this, is Eva. We got married in Florence, which impressed a lot of people. I hadn't thought of it as romantic until people started saying it was. Eva's not really a romantic kind. I said to her tonight that I might dress up in the suit that I wore to our wedding, and she said, "Well, you look better in the new one, do you?" So here I am in the new one, but that is the tie that I wore. It's a beautiful tie. It's made of peach skin, and I was sure that that was going to be a big new trend, another economist's prediction. But it's a beautiful tie, and I don't buy ties for whether they're trendy or not. Anyway, just as Rick reassures Ilsa in Casablanca that we'll always have Paris, Eva and I are on a promise that having married in Florence, if it comes to us, we'll always have Venice for the divorce. For some years after we got married, I would occasionally stand alongside Eva, side by side, push my arm dangling down into her side and say, "Eva, will you marry me?" Yes, we have been married, yes, I said that. Eva said yes for a few years, and then the answer was never quite so enthusiastic. When I told her I was leaving paid employment to work for myself, she seemed pleased until I told her I'd be working from home. Eva became alarmed. It's been a long time, but since the kids have flown the coop, Eva has spent less and less time at home. In fact, I've taken to calling her Captain Oates, after the man who accompanied Scott of the Antarctic and who heroically left the tent and took off into the blizzard on Scott's doomed journey to and from the South Pole, so as not to slow the rest down with the immortal words, "I'm just stepping outside, I may be some time." So I didn't think I'd risk asking Eva to marry me again tonight. I'm not sure what answer I'd get, but that doesn't mean that I can't risk embarrassing her a little and ask her to accept a gift from me in recognition, in thanks for all she's done, for all she is for me and our two incredible kids. Thank you.